Elon Musk was deep into another routine video conference about Tesla's Cybertruck when something unusual caught his eye: a growing crowd at an Austin intersection. At the center stood a young girl in a worn red dress, her performance so captivating that people instinctively raised their phones, drawn in like moths to a flame. For Elon, it should have been just another fleeting scene in a packed day. But something about the way she moved, too precise, too rehearsed, set off an alarm in his mind. Within hours, that Cybertruck meeting would fade into irrelevance because he was about to uncover a hidden side of Austin, Texas, one that existed in the shadows of his gleaming tech empire. The afternoon sun beamed down as Elon cruised through the city in his Cybertruck, its angular, futuristic frame standing out among the sea of conventional vehicles. Inside, the truck's tinted windows provided him with a mobile command center, a space where high-stakes decisions were made on the go. His eyes darted between the road and the dashboard screen, where his team was discussing the latest advancements in battery efficiency. The exoskeleton isn't just for aesthetics, Elon explained, his voice sharp with energy. It's fundamental to the truck's structural integrity, making it tougher than anything else on the road. A team member leaned into her camera. What about battery range? Any improvements since the last prototype? Elon nodded, a slight smirk playing on his lips. 50 extra miles on a single charge. The team's been working overtime, and the results are showing. The meeting carried on, production schedules, marketing strategies, the usual rhythm of progress, but as the Cybertruck rolled to a stop at a red light, Elon's focus slipped. Something at the crosswalk made him do a double take. A crowd had formed, their gazes locked on a girl no older than 12 or 13, standing in the middle of the street. She wore a bright red dress that clashed against the muted tones of the city. In her hands, she held a tin can, shaking it occasionally, the rattling sound cutting through the noise of passing cars. It wasn't just her presence that struck Elon, it was the crowd's reaction. They weren't just watching. They were waiting. Phones raised. Expressions tense, expectant. It wasn't the casual curiosity of people passing by a street performer. It was something else. Elon? Are you still with us? A voice from the conference jolted him back. The light had turned green. A chorus of impatient honks snapped him to action. Apologies, he said smoothly, pressing the accelerator and rolling forward. Where were we? But as the meeting continued, his mind stayed stuck on that girl. The red dress. The silent anticipation of the crowd. The sense that something wasn't quite right. It felt like an unfinished puzzle, a loose thread pulling at the edges of his otherwise structured day. An hour later, the meeting wrapped up. Elon had made decisions that would shape the future of the Cybertruck, but one decision remained unfinished in his mind. Instead of heading back to the factory, as planned, he turned the wheel. He had to know. What had he just witnessed? And more importantly, would she still be there? The unknown beckoned, a siren call that even Elon Musk, with all his experience and success, found impossible to ignore. As the Cybertruck's tires crunched over loose gravel, he pulled up near the intersection, scanning the area, searching for that flash of red that had caught his attention earlier. The once gathered crowd was now scattering, people drifting away in small groups, their curiosity apparently satisfied. But she was still there. The girl in the red dress stood alone now, a solitary figure in the fading afternoon light. From this closer vantage point, Elon noticed details he hadn't before. The dress, though striking, was worn, frayed at the hem, smudged with dirt. The tin can in her hands, now unobstructed by onlookers, was filled with coins and crumpled bills. Something didn't add up. Elon's brow furrowed. The contrast between the apparent success of her collection and the rough condition of her clothing felt off. He didn't like unsolved equations. Making a split-second decision, he reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a pair of sunglasses and a plain baseball cap. He was too recognizable, especially in Texas, and if he wanted honest answers, he couldn't afford distractions. Disguised as best he could, he stepped out of the Cybertruck. The heat hit him instantly, a sharp contrast to the cool, climate-controlled cocoon of his vehicle. He approached the girl cautiously, his mind racing with questions. As he neared, her eyes flicked toward him. Not with surprise, not even with curiosity, but with something else, something that looked a lot like resignation. Like she was used to being approached by strangers. That detail unsettled him. Before he could speak, a woman's voice sliced through the air. "There you are, sweetie. Great job today." Elon turned. A woman was hurrying toward them, a high-end camera swinging from her neck. She flashed a bright, practiced smile at him, but there was something in her eyes, something nervous. "I hope she wasn't bothering you," the woman said quickly. "That performance, it's for a school project. A social experiment to study public reactions to child beggars. We're filming it for her class." Elon listened, but with every word, his skepticism grew. The explanation was too smooth, too polished. He glanced at the girl. She remained silent, her expression unreadable. "A school project?" Elon repeated, keeping his tone neutral. "That's quite an elaborate setup for homework." The woman nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes. Her teacher believes in hands-on learning experiences. Very progressive." Elon noted that she didn't recognize him either, an advantage. It gave him room to ask the kind of questions most people wouldn't. "If it's just a social experiment," he pressed, "why collect actual money from people?" For a split second, the woman's smile wavered. Then, just as quickly, it was back. "Oh, we're donating all of it to homeless charities. It's part of the project's ethical considerations." Elon's expression didn't change, but internally, he was dissecting every detail. "And which charities would those be?" The woman's hand tightened on the girl's shoulder. "Various local organizations. We haven't finalized the list yet. A little too vague. A little too convenient. Now, if you'll excuse us, we really must be going," she continued, her voice overly cheerful. "Lots of video editing to do. Homework's due tomorrow, after all." Before Elon could push further, she took the girl's hand and quickly led her away, her upbeat chatter about editing software floating behind them. Elon watched them disappear into the distance. Slowly, he slipped his sunglasses back on. Something wasn't right. The professional-grade camera. The stark contrast between the woman's polished demeanor and the girl's threadbare clothing. The quick, too perfect explanations. The way the girl never spoke, never reacted. It didn't make sense. Back inside the Cybertruck, Elon sat behind the wheel, but he didn't start the engine. He just stared out at the street, replaying the encounter in his head. He wasn't the kind of man who ignored patterns. His entire success had been built on seeing what others overlooked, on questioning the status quo. And right now, this didn't feel like a social experiment. It felt like a lie. And if there was one thing Elon Musk couldn't stand, it was an unanswered question. Been with her earlier was gone. Elon's pulse quickened. The girl moved at a steady pace, her red dress swaying slightly with each step. She didn't seem lost, but she also didn't seem like she was headed anywhere in particular. She was just walking. He kept his distance, driving slowly, his mind turning over everything he had seen so far. The staged social experiment, the camera, the nervous woman, the money in the tin can, it all felt off. And now, here she was, alone, with no sign of the woman who had so quickly whisked her away earlier. Elon pulled over a block ahead, parking the car in a spot that wouldn't draw attention. He stepped out, casually adjusting his cap, and started walking in the same direction as the girl, keeping a careful distance. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe she'd meet back up with the woman. Maybe she'd enter a specific house, revealing where she lived. Maybe this would give him the missing piece of the puzzle. But what happened next took him by surprise. The girl suddenly stopped and turned, her sharp eyes locking onto him. For a brief second, neither of them moved. The street was quiet, the distant hum of the city the only background noise. Then, without hesitation, she walked straight toward him. Elon forced himself to stay still, not wanting to startle her. She approached with a kind of quiet confidence, her gaze unwavering, as if she had already decided something before she even reached him. "You're following me," she said flatly. Elon hesitated, then gave a small, disarming smile. "Seemed like you were part of something interesting earlier. Just wanted to understand what it was." The girl studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he had first assumed, maybe 11, maybe 12. Her face was sharp, not in a delicate way, but in a way that suggested she had seen too much for her age. "That lady from earlier," Elon continued, keeping his voice level. "She said it was a school project. But it didn't really seem like one." Something flickered in the girl's eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even surprise. It was more like calculation, like she was trying to decide how much to say. Then, finally, she answered. "It wasn't." Elon felt a chill roll down his spine. He had expected a deflection. Maybe another rehearsed line like the ones the woman had given. But this was the first honest thing he had heard since he got involved. He crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "So what was it, then?" The girl glanced around, as if checking if anyone else was watching. Then she took a deep breath. "You really want to know?" she asked. Elon nodded. She leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "Then you're gonna need to keep walking. And act normal." And just like that, the mystery deepened. To shut down the conversation, her arms crossing over her chest like a barrier. Elon steadied her, taking in the way she held herself, defensive, but not afraid. She had clearly learned to navigate situations far beyond what any child should have to deal with. "It does matter," he said finally, keeping his voice steady. "Because what you're describing sounds like more than just a scam. It sounds like someone is using you. And if that's the case, you don't have to keep doing this." Kelly scoffed. "And what do you think I should do? Just walk away? It's not that simple." Elon exhaled, his mind working through the implications of what she was saying. The woman had crafted an entire operation around fake sob stories, manipulating public sympathy for cash. And Kelly, caught in the middle, wasn't just playing a role, she was surviving. "You said you needed money for school," Elon said. "So you're still going?" Kelly hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. When I can. It's not easy." Her voice had softened just a fraction, the first crack in the wall she had built between them. Elon glanced at the landfill around them, at the makeshift shelters pieced together from discarded materials, the lingering scent of decay and oil in the air. She wasn't lying. This was her reality. His grip tightened on the chain-link fence. "You shouldn't have to do this just to get an education," he said, more to himself than to her. Kelly gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, shouldn't doesn't change anything." Elon let the silence hang between them for a moment before he spoke again. "I can help you." Kelly's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to be underestimated. To have people assume you can't do something just because of where you come from or what your circumstances are. And I know that the right opportunity can change everything." She didn't respond right away, her fingers absently toying with the frayed edge of her dress. Then, with a quiet sigh, she met his gaze. "Even if I wanted help," she said carefully, "that woman, she won't just let me leave." Elon's jaw tightened. He had built entire industries by solving problems no one else wanted to touch. This was just another challenge. "Then we'll figure out a way," he said. Kelly studied him, searching his face for any hint of deception. When she found none, she gave a small nod. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was a start. And Elon Musk never walked away from unfinished business. Instantly. "I don't need saving," she said, her voice sharp with defiance. Elon held up his hands, palms facing her in a gesture of peace. I'm not saying you do. I'm saying you deserve more options. Better ones. Kelly scoffed, tearing a piece of crust off her pizza. People like you always say that. You think money fixes everything. It doesn't. Elon exhaled, watching her carefully. She was tough, tougher than most adults he knew. But beneath all that, there was something else. A kid who had learned to rely on herself because no one else ever stuck around long enough to help. Okay, he said finally. Then tell me what does. Kelly hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin in front of her. For a moment, it looked like she might say something real, something honest, but then, just as quickly, she shut down again. You don't get it, she murmured, shaking her head. You can't help. You'll just make things worse. Elon frowned. Worse how? She glanced around the restaurant, as if afraid someone might be listening. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. She'll know I talked to you. The woman from earlier. She has people watching. Something cold settled in Elon's chest. People watching? Kelly nodded. She's not just some random scammer. There's more of them. They find kids like me, kids who have nowhere else to go, and she stopped herself, shaking her head again. It doesn't matter. Just forget it. Elon's mind raced. This was bigger than he thought. Kelly, he said carefully. If you're in danger, I can. Stop, she cut him off, her voice suddenly urgent. Just finish your pizza and go, okay? You don't know what you're getting into. Elon sat back, his jaw tightening. He could see it in her eyes of fear, real fear. Not for herself, but for what might happen if she said too much. That only made him more determined. All right, he said after a pause, his voice lighter, as if dropping the subject. Pizza first. No strings attached. Kelly studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, reluctant nod. But Elon Musk wasn't the type to walk away from a problem. And now? This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was personal. At him, regret that he hadn't pushed harder, hadn't found a way to convince her that she didn't have to do this alone. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the paused frame of Kelly's face on the screen. There was something in her eyes, something that had been there when she talked about science, about art. A spark. A potential that was being wasted in a world that saw her as nothing more than a tool for profit. Elon wasn't naive. He knew that stepping in meant disrupting an entire operation, one that clearly didn't want outsiders poking around. This wasn't just some scam run by a desperate woman. This was a system, one that had been running long enough for an entire network of people to be involved. And if there was one thing Elon Musk hated, it was systems that thrived on exploiting the vulnerable. He exhaled, rubbing his temple. He had taken on governments, corporations, and industries resistant to change. He had built rockets, electric cars, and AI that were reshaping the world. But somehow, in a small forgotten corner of Austin, a kid in a red dress had presented him with a challenge he hadn't expected. A battle that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with the kind of world he wanted to live in. Elon closed his laptop, his mind already calculating his next steps. He couldn't force Kelly to accept help, but he could make sure she had the option. He could track the money flow, find out where it was really going. He could use his resources to disrupt this operation, expose it, make it impossible for them to keep using kids like her. And more than that, he could make sure Kelly got the education she deserved. No more patchwork lessons, no more hustling for tuition. If she wanted to learn, she would. Tomorrow, he would start making calls. Tomorrow, this so-called social experiment would start to unravel. And tomorrow, whether she realized it or not, Kelly's life was about to change forever. Treat. For a brief moment, the tension in her shoulders eased, and the exhaustion in her face was replaced by something softer, something closer to gratitude. Elon stood frozen in the shadows, watching this quiet exchange. Everything about it was wrong. The way they lived, the way Kelly, so young, had taken on responsibilities no child should bear. The way she gave up food she needed just to make sure someone else had something decent to eat. The woman had called her mom. So was she really her mother? Or was it just a habit, a role Kelly had adopted out of necessity? Either way, one thing was clear: Kelly wasn't just surviving for herself. She was carrying someone else on her back, too. And that meant she wasn't going to just walk away with Elon's help, no matter how much he offered. He exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had seen firsthand the exploitation, the manipulation, the lies told to strangers in the name of YouTube revenue. But now, he was seeing something else, something that complicated everything. Kelly wasn't just a victim. She was a protector. Elon had spent years disrupting industries, challenging broken systems, forcing progress where others saw dead ends. And now, standing in the shadows of a crumbling house, he felt something unfamiliar, a sense of personal responsibility that had nothing to do with business or innovation. This wasn't about fixing a broken system. This was about a girl in a red dress who had learned to be tougher than the world around her, because no one had ever given her the choice to be anything else. And Elon Musk wasn't about to let that continue. He took a step back, careful not to make a sound. He needed a new approach, one that wouldn't send Kelly running. She didn't need pity. She didn't need to be rescued. She needed options. Elon turned and walked back toward his car, his decision made. Tomorrow, he wasn't going to offer her a way out. He was going to give her a reason to take it. Elon stood in the shadows, watching as Kelly and Alexandra sorted through salvaged belongings beneath the weak glow of a battery-powered lantern. Their entire world had been reduced to a burnt-out house, a landfill serving as their source of survival, and fabricated YouTube videos acting as their lifeline. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut: this was their reality. A fragile, makeshift existence built on survival tactics no child or mother should ever have to master. He had seen poverty before, but this was different. This wasn't just about struggling to get by. This was about being invisible, about slipping through the cracks of a system that had already written them off. Steeling himself, he stepped forward, his presence immediately startling them. Kelly's body went rigid, her eyes darting toward an escape route, her posture shifting into defense. Alexandra's hand instinctively moved in front of the girl, a silent but clear gesture of protection. Elon raised his hands in peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand and help." Alexandra's sharp eyes locked onto him, her expression unreadable but cautious. Silence stretched between them, the tension thick. "You again," she said, recognizing him. Kelly took a step back, her fists clenched, her jaw set. "I told you to leave us alone." Elon remained calm, his voice steady. "I know. But I couldn't just walk away." Alexandra steadied him, her expression flickering between suspicion and something else, wariness, exhaustion, maybe even curiosity. "We don't need your help," she said flatly. Elon hesitated for a brief moment before deciding to be direct. "I think you do." Kelly bristled. "We're fine." But Elon shook his head. "This?" He gestured to the charred remains of the house behind them, to the worn-out blankets on the ground, to the way Kelly's clothes hung off her frame just a little too loosely. "This isn't fine. No one should have to live like this." His words landed heavily, stirring something unspoken. Alexandra folded her arms, her voice low and guarded. "Why do you care? Why would someone like you, Elon Musk, care about people like us?" "Because I can help," he answered simply. "And because I believe no one should have to fight this hard just to survive." For the first time, Alexandra didn't respond right away. Her silence wasn't just skepticism, it was something deeper. A lifetime of broken promises. A reflex to push people away before they could leave first. Finally, with a sigh, she sat down on a piece of overturned concrete, rubbing her forehead as if exhausted by the weight of the conversation. "We've been on our own for a long time," she admitted. "I don't trust people who say they want to help." Elon didn't flinch. He understood that trust wasn't given easily. "Then don't trust me," he said. "Just listen." Alexandra glanced at Kelly, who stood stiffly beside her, arms crossed. The girl's eyes flickered between them, conflicted. After a long pause, Alexandra nodded. "All right. We'll listen." She exhaled slowly, glancing at Kelly before finally giving in. "My name's Alexandra. I'm Kelly's mother. And this." She gestured to the ruins behind her. "This used to be our home. Until the fire." Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. "We lost everything. My husband didn't make it out. And after that, there was no one left to help us. No one who cared." Elon swallowed hard, the gravity of her words settling deep in his chest. Kelly shifted uncomfortably but finally spoke. "We had to figure things out on our own." Alexandra nodded. "And people like us, we don't get second chances." "So you lie," Elon said, his voice gentle but knowing. "Not lie," Alexandra countered. "We survive." She explained how they changed their story depending on the situation, sometimes mother and daughter, sometimes employer and worker, always adapting to avoid suspicion, to keep authorities from tearing them apart. "If anyone finds out how we really live, what do you think happens next?" she asked. "Child Services steps in. They separate us. Kelly goes to a group home, I go wherever they decide." Elon's jaw tightened. He had spent his career breaking through impossible barriers, fighting against bureaucracy, defying limitations. But this was something different. This was a mother doing whatever it took to stay with her daughter. He looked at Kelly, seeing the weight she carried, the resilience, the survival instincts that no child should have to develop. "You shouldn't have to live like this," he said softly. "And I can help." Alexandra let out a bitter laugh. "Help how? You think you can just throw money at the problem and fix it?" "No," Elon said. "But I can build a real home for you. A place where you don't have to hide. And I can make sure Kelly gets the education she deserves." The words hung in the air. Kelly stared at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. Hope, maybe. Fear. Uncertainty. Alexandra didn't respond right away. She looked at Kelly, her daughter's guarded expression mirroring her own hesitations. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll listen." That night, Elon brought them to his hotel. He made sure their dignity remained intact, arranging for a private room and handling everything discreetly. Kelly's eyes widened slightly when they entered, the sight of clean sheets, warm lighting, and a soft bed so foreign to her world. Alexandra, despite her usual composure, exhaled with quiet relief. "Thank you," she murmured, barely above a whisper. Elon simply nodded. But as he left their door, he knew this wasn't just about offering a warm bed for the night. This was the beginning of something bigger. A home. An education. A chance to rewrite the future. And as he walked back to his own room, he made a silent vow. He wouldn't just help them survive. He would make sure they thrived. Because for the first time in a long while, hope wasn't just a distant dream. It was real.